You say he is not your friend.
Right.
And if you don't go in there with that perspective, he could engineer the conversation.
I have a lot of faith in President Trump. You know, Bush misread Putin. Putin ran over Obama because he was so weak in the eyes of President Putin. President Trump needs to convince President Putin that he wants a better relationship, but things have to change to get it. And at the end of the day, Putin doesn't respect Trump. This will be a failed summit. I believe that President Trump is going to lay out what a good relationship will look like and challenge Putin to get there. And if he fails to get there, that Trump's going to convince him, unlike Bush, unlike Obama, you'll pay a price on my watch. That's what I predict.
So the big question is, what's the goal with Putin? What does he want to get out of it? What's the leverage? What's the exchange? How do you see that working?
To tell him if you continue to meddle in elections in the United States, there'll never be a good relationship. Help me contain Iran, because Iran is a menace to the Mideast. Stop helping the Taliban. Let's fight ISIS together. Get Assad out of Syria and put somebody in Syria that we both can work with. Change your behavior to get a good relationship. Be tough. When he met Kim Jong-un, the only reason he met him is I think Kim Jong-un believes that military force would be used by Trump if he had to. He's got to convince Putin that there's a better relationship available between the United States and Russia, but here are the terms and conditions, and if you fail to meet those terms and conditions, I'm going to be your worst enemy. I could be your best friend, but I could be your worst enemy. And if Putin doesn't believe that, that will be a mistake. All
right, Rod Rosenstein came out today and leveled an indictment against 12 members of the Russian intelligence agencies and the military. It happened right as the president was landing in Windsor. What's the impact of that news on this meeting?
Means nothing to me. I know the Russians did it. It was the Russians that hacked into the DNC, that got Clinton's emails, that got Podesta's emails. People in your business are going to have to decide, do you empower a foreign government when they hack into a political party in the United States going forward? So I didn't learn anything. I want President Trump to go to meet Putin. I want a better relationship. But when Putin says, I didn't do it, I want President Trump to say, I reject that denial. You did do it, and my friend, if you continue to do it, and they're coming after Republicans in 2018, nothing would please Russia more than chaos in America. The Democrats get the House, and we at each other's throats. So I worry about their meddling in 2018.
You think the Russians are meddling in the midterm election in order to for the Republicans to lose the House?
Well, we could lose without Russia being involved, but just think about it. There's fake news being pushed, truly fake news, in these competitive seats. Our intelligence agency says that Russia's still up to it. And I think President Trump's got to let him know that if you keep doing this, we'll never have a good relationship. Russia didn't beat Clinton. Trump beat Clinton. But President Trump, I want you to understand, Putin's not your friend. He's not the friend of democracy. He needs to fear you and respect you for us to have a good relationship.
Interesting. Senator Lindsey Graham, thank you. Very good to have you live with us in London. We're lucky that you happen to be here, and always good to see you. Thank you, sir. So still to come tonight, President Trump getting the royal treatment as he met Britain's Queen Elizabeth for the very first time. And we're going to talk to a royal expert about what happens behind the closed doors at this event. And while the two heads of state met, tens of thousands of anti-Trump protesters flooded the streets in London. Benjamin Hall was out there. He has a live report from
Donald Trump's not welcome here. Donald Trump's not welcome here. Donald Trump's not welcome here.
So tens of thousands of people took to the streets today in London's Trafalgar Square protesting President Trump as he met with Queen Elizabeth and Prime Minister Theresa May. Benjamin Hall was there, and he joins us live with the story. Good evening, Ben.
Good evening, Martha. Well, yes, as you say, just about an hour away from where President Trump was meeting and having tea with Queen Elizabeth here in central London in Trafalgar Square was the largest rally we've seen in about 15 years. But we got to speak to people both inside the protest and also outside the protest. And what we heard actually conveyed two very different points. Have a look. Tens of thousands rallied on the streets of London today to vent their anger at President Trump's visit to the UK. It was the largest protest in 15 years and brought parts of central London to a standstill.
I think it's important in the show of strength that there has been today, really. We're talking over 100,000 people that have turned out today to to campaign against Donald Trump's visit to the UK?
Well, I'd really like him to just disappear, actually. I think he's completely unsuitable to be President of the United States.
It was a protest about many other issues, though, and the crowd was led in various chants to fight against climate change, fight for Palestine, fight for socialism, even fight for Muslim rights. This is now the biggest protest the UK has seen since 2003, but it's more than anti-capitalist, anti-imperialist, anti-Brexit protests as it is about anti-President Trump, and sadly, many of the protests against the president are personal, not political. Among them, a 20-foot-tall blimp that depicted the president as a baby holding a cell phone, which was the centrepiece for demonstrators. Controversially, Sadiq Khan, the London mayor, gave his express permission for it to fly in Parliament Square, citing freedom of speech. But many others said this was the worst way to welcome the UK's closest ally. There were also heated exchanges as a small group of far-right-wing supporters engaged the anti-Trump supporters, leading to scuffles. The two sides were eventually separated. But away from the protests, many voiced their objection. The Trump Arms, once just a small local pub in London, was rebranded to commemorate the president's visit, and staff there were pulling pints in his honour. It's also where supporters gathered from across the UK to discuss the president.
Good on you, keep on going, you know. Despite the media trashing him, he stands strong.
And outside Parliament, others supported the president.
He's the President of the United States, and you know, he should be respected as such. I support him.
While others thought the media should look past the protests. Do you think that it's maybe harming the special relationship to be having these kind of protests?
It's stronger than that. It's built on other things. It's not even political. I think it's built up in security and history and culture and things that are timeless.
So there was also quite a lot of anger here at the protest directed at Theresa May and her government, that anger that she had reached out to President Trump and invited him and rolled out the red carpet. But that is exactly what they did, because the UK is in quite a precarious political situation at the moment. They are so divided over Brexit that they say they need the special relationship. They need the support of their closest ally, the US. And so despite what we saw here in central London, there really is a feeling at government level that that bond is as strong as ever. Martha?
Very interesting to see that mix of opinions out there, and you captured it so well, Ben. Thank you very much. Good to have you with us tonight. So here now, Tom Rogan, commentary writer for the Washington Examiner, who was born and raised in England. Adam Bolton, editor-at-large for Sky News, who has served as political editor for 25 years, and you have seen a lot along the way, both of you have.
Mrs May will be breathing a sigh of relief that the visitors passed off without too much damage, although his interview in The Sun was a massive breach of diplomatic norms and also hugely damaging to her at this stage over Brexit. As far as the people speaking there, overwhelmingly the mood of the British people, it's reflected in opinion polls, is that personally they don't like Donald Trump very much. They disagree with his policies on many things, ranging from the environment. Muslims, and that's why they were demonstrating on the streets today. But you know, demonstrations come and go. After all, there was a bigger demonstration against President Bush in Washington the day after the inauguration than there was at the time of the inauguration.
Yeah, I mean, Tom, when you look at what we saw today out there, how much do you think it reflects what's going on with people in this country? Because we've heard a lot about a mood being somewhat different in London than it is in Middle England and other parts of the UK.
Well, I think, as Adam says, the polling data suggests that President Trump is personally unpopular. But beyond that, in terms of the relationship of the United States and the United Kingdom, I think, as one of the gentlemen Ben was interviewing there said, the systemic nature of the cooperation on defense, intelligence, industry really means that actually a lot of those people who had been out on the streets today would favor a strong relationship with the United States. And so broadly, when it matters in those areas, the relationship is strong. And I think, you know, these protests, as Adam says, they do come and go. And frankly, they're not really that important.
Although it has to be said, they were quite widespread. It wasn't just the City of London. There were protests in Manchester, in Sheffield, in Glasgow, even in Windsor, outside Windsor Castle. There were protests. So, you know, Donald Trump is such a big figure that everyone has an opinion on him. They don't always have a really strong opinion about an American president.
I mean, I can only imagine. Theresa May, it must have been quite an emotional whipsaw over the last 24 hours, right? She invites President Trump. He's here for this trip. You know, one minute he's criticizing her. The next minute he's bending over backwards to try to make sure that he's complimenting her. You know, where do you think they go from here in that relationship? Because he clearly left the door open to support Boris Johnson.
Well, yeah, I mean, it is the equivalent of, you know, Mrs. May going and doing an interview with the mainstream media in America on a visit and saying, actually, I think America should sign up to NAFTA and TTIP. And by the way, I think Ted Cruz would be a great president.
Exactly.
I mean, it's quite quite an extraordinary thing to say. She, however, is pretty stoical. She has taken a lot of punishment, and she would say, and I think her advisors would say, that by the end of the day, I mean, Donald Trump came close to apologizing for those remarks. So,
I would say so. Yeah.
Personally, going forward, if these relationships matter between the president and the prime minister, she hasn't done badly at the end.
What do you think, Tom?
No, I agree. I actually think it's incredibly striking, historically striking, actually, the sea change in attitude. And I think that was to be expected based on, I think the president does have personal admiration for Theresa May, even if he might prefer Boris Johnson to be in Downing Street. But broadly, I think Theresa May doing, you know, the president said this, that as much as Xi Jinping put on the pageantry in Beijing and Macron with Bastille Day in 2017, I think with the Blenheim Palace and the SAS and Delta Force at Sandhurst, that stuff works for Trump, and it plays to what he is briefed on, which is those systemic relationships. So ultimately, I think Downing Street will be, okay, great that he's out there playing golf now, but also, okay, thank you, Mr. President, for sort of recovering some of that.
I remember when he came back from France, he said, we should have military parades like that at home. So I'm wondering if he's going to come back to America and say, we actually should have a queen. I kind of like that whole idea.
He got a bit muddled with the Queen on the expecting the Guard of Honor. He didn't know what to do, and he kind of blocked her out, which is pretty...
I know. I think everyone was kind of holding their breath, hoping that was the physical dynamic was going to work there, and she took a turn at one point, and then he was kind of in front of her. It's interesting because he's not a person who's intimidated very easily, but I think he was nervous about meeting the Queen.
Yeah, I think the Queen puts on those displays just to remind people.
What do you think she thinks of him?
Well, we will never know.
Say, right?
We will never know. She doesn't write her memoirs. She doesn't give interviews. I shouldn't imagine she's very impressed. I mean, to be honest, although he's retired, I think the fact that Prince Philip didn't turn up was a subtle message that perhaps they're not as looking for as close a relationship with the Trumps as perhaps they had with the Obamas.
But they do know that the importance of the relationship, you know, the defense side, the intelligence side is absolutely critical. I mean, in terms of counterterrorism, and that is why you see, even with officials who are not really predisposed to President Trump, which I think is the norm in the establishment, they are very happy this trip took place and it didn't go off without a bang. It went off with a side bang and then a sort of recovery. And so they will say, okay, we'll take that, move it forward.
Big sigh of relief, and maybe
and also, you shouldn't take it away from the First Lady. I mean, Melania has gone down fantastically well. Everyone loved the pictures of her meeting the kids and the Chelsea pensioners. So she's been
she's a nice moderating factor. She does a lovely job with all of that. Thank you so much, both of you. It's really good to have you here.
Thank you.
Adam Bolton and Tom Roken, our British experts this evening. Thank you, gentlemen. So the White House is said to be widening the circle of who can get a look at the evidence that the FBI put an informant in the Trump campaign and why. Alan Dershowitz is here with what it might mean for the case. And a warning for President Trump from a man with firsthand knowledge of the brutality of Vladimir Putin. Bill Browder, who calls himself Putin's #1 foreign enemy, here with his sobering analysis next.
I think I'd have a very good relationship with President Putin if we spend time together, and I may be wrong. I'm not going in with high expectations, but we may come out with some very surprising things. We met him at the G20, and if we could develop a relationship, which is good for Russia, good for us, good for everybody, that would be great.
President Trump saying that he is entering Monday's one-on-one with Vladimir Putin with his eyes open. And my next guest wants to make sure of that, having experienced firsthand the brutality of the Russian strongman. Bill Browder ran a highly successful investment fund in Russia until 2005, when he was abruptly expelled, and his company was used to perpetrate a massive tax fraud. He hired Russian lawyer Sergei Magnitsky to find out what was going on with his company and this infiltration. Magnitsky was then thrown into a Russian prison where he died in 2009 after being beaten and denied medical care. He was 37 years old, and he left behind a wife and 2 children. Ever since, Browder has campaigned to punish Russia, and he says that as a result of this, he has become Putin's target himself. Bill Browder joins us now with a reality check into this man and how his mind works and what he likely wants to get out of this meeting with President Trump. Bill, good to see you back on the program tonight. Thank you very much for being here. You recently were arrested in Spain, and you believe that that was put upon you by Russian intelligence there, right?
Yeah, so about a month ago, I was arrested in Madrid, Spain. I was in Madrid to provide evidence to the Spanish prosecutor about money from the crime that my lawyer Sergei Magnitsky uncovered and was killed over going to Spain. And about an hour and a half before the meeting was scheduled to start, some Spanish police officers showed up at my hotel room and took me in on a Russian Interpol arrest warrant. Now, thankfully, I was able to tweet out that I was being arrested. And by the time I got to the station, they were getting so many telephone calls from politicians and journalists, they realized that they had made a big mistake. And about 2 hours later, Interpol called them up and told them to release me. But this was the 7th time that Russia had used Interpol to try to get me arrested, to get me sent back to Russia so they could kill me like they did Sergei Magnitsky, my lawyer.
Now, what about, does the FBI contact you about this? Are they in touch with the fact that everywhere you go, you run the possibility of being arrested by a Russian warrant, essentially?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of different people on my side from different law enforcement agencies around the world, but I always have to be careful. There's a lot of countries that I don't travel to because I know that the governments in those countries are weak and would potentially hand me over to do a favor for Vladimir Putin. Putin is a cold-blooded killer, and Putin would love to get rid of me. The reason he hates me so much is that I was the person responsible for the Magnitsky Act, which imposes sanctions, freezes assets, and bans visas for Russian human rights violators. And because Putin and all of his cronies have so much money that they've stolen in Russia that they keep in the West, they really hate that more than anything.
You know, everybody remembers the discussion about the Magnitsky Act and lifting it from that June 12th Trump Tower meeting that Donald Trump Jr. took with some of these officials who were connected to it. But the sort of common knowledge is, oh, that's not really what they wanted to talk about. They really wanted to talk about dirt on Hillary. Do you believe they were really there because they were hoping to get some in to get that lifted?
Yeah, well, so, I mean, the one thing that everybody from that meeting, that Trump Tower meeting, could agree on in their depositions, and I've read all the depositions, is that the purpose of the meeting from the Russian side was to get the Magnitsky Act repealed. That was the main purpose of that meeting. We don't know what they offered to have that done, and we don't know if anything, what else was said, but we know that that's what they wanted. That's what the Russians wanted from that meeting.
This is a quote, rather, from the New York Times, quoting Susan Rice from the Obama administration. Let's take a look at this, and I want to get your thoughts on what she said. His coming summit with Mr. Putin in Helsinki is a dangerous and counterproductive undertaking. The risks are many, and the benefits, if any, are difficult to discern. Do you agree with that?
Well, I don't think that it should be a summit at all. I don't think, I mean, I know, I was just in Washington, I was just meeting with Democrats and Republicans, and there's not a single member of Congress that thinks that there should be a summit taking place. It just doesn't make sense to dignify Vladimir Putin with a meeting with the most important man in the free world. Vladimir Putin is running an economy the size of the state of New York. His military budget is 90% less than the United States. And he's making trouble all over the world. He shouldn't be dignified. He shouldn't be rewarded with this type of recognition.
there are Senator Graham was just here. He does think that the meeting should take place. So there are certainly some who believe that it would be a good idea. You have called Vladimir Putin Pablo Escobar with nukes, as you just said, a cold-blooded killer, a bald-faced liar. What would you tell President Trump as he goes into this meeting? What does he need to understand about this man and how to read him?
Well, I would say that so when he goes into that meeting, he shouldn't be asking Putin for anything, because there's nothing that we can get from Putin. He should be telling Putin that he should stop doing the bad stuff that he's doing. He should pull out of Ukraine. He should stop all this nonsense in Syria. He should stop meddling in elections in the United States and the UK and France and Germany. And he should just become a properly behaved world citizen. If he does that, then he should be recognized as being a player, a normal player in the Western world. And if he doesn't, we should come down on him like a ton of bricks, which we have the capacity to do as the United States, as UK, as France. In the West, we're bigger, more powerful than Vladimir Putin, and he should understand that we will act if he doesn't behave himself.
Very interesting, Bill. Thank you so much. Good to have you here tonight.
Thank you.
So Rudy Giuliani says that the Peter Strzok hearing should signal the end of the investigation into the Trump campaign. Alan Dershowitz is here with the new developments and what they might actually mean.
Like a very serious event, but we'll find out. When they look at the documents, I think people are going to see a lot of bad things happen. I hope it's not so, because if it is, there's never been anything like it in the history of our country. We now call it Spygate. You're calling it Spygate.
So new tonight, we could see what evidence there is on that FBI informant who reportedly tried to infiltrate the Trump campaign in the lead up to the 2016 election. Now, according to the New York Times, the White House has now ordered wider access for the classified documents that detail that investigation. In other words, files once only accessible to the Gang of Eight will soon be available to all the members of the House and Senate Intelligence Committees to take a look at. Here now, Alan Dershowitz, Harvard Law Professor Emeritus and author of the new book, The Case Against Impeaching Trump. Alan, great to see you tonight. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you.
What do you think is the significance of the fact that the White House is now going to expand the number of people who can look into this issue of when this informant was hired and what the timing of that tells us about what initiated this investigation in the first place?
Well, I think it's a good development, and I think ultimately the American public has to know what went on here. We may not be able to know some of the specifics, which are classified, but we ought to learn the general parameters of what happened. Remember, I went through the situation in my life where the government put spies in the anti-war movement, the civil rights movement. So every civil libertarian should be concerned about, even if there's a possibility that an informant was intruded into a political campaign. That's just not right. That's just not American. And, you know, that's why I called for an independent, nonpartisan commission to investigate the whole election. Because Mueller is not going to look into this because it's not a crime. And the congressional committees are going to bicker against each other, Republicans, Democrats. There's Republican truth, there's Democrat truth. If you had a nonpartisan expert commission, there'd be real truth. And that's what the American public is entitled to find out what actually happened in this election.
Yeah, I think everybody should want to know the answer to that question. With regard to Peter Strzok's testimony this week, here is Rudy Giuliani, lawyer to the president, talking about this last night. Take a listen.
Mueller should be ashamed of himself. Those Democrats trying to protect that liar, Strzok, today should be ashamed of themselves. And every FBI agent I know wants to see this guy drummed out of the Bureau.
What do you make of that, Alan? He's... Go ahead.
He should be drummed out of the Bureau. The idea that a man would make those kinds of statements while he's involved in an investigation and not recuse himself. He should have recused himself. And he's telling us, yes, I was biased, but the bias didn't influence his decisions. We all know as lawyers that bias influences decisions even unconsciously, even if you don't know. That's why no lawyer would ever allow a person like Peter Strzok to serve on a jury against somebody with whom he had that kind of a biased approach. So, you know, this is a serious issue. And both Democrats and Republicans did not look good yesterday. But the lowest of the low points came with Congressman Cohn of, I think, Tennessee, where he offered this guy a medal, a Purple Heart. I mean, what an insult to the men and women who have been wounded and hurt for the rest of their lives and earn a Purple Heart. To give this guy a Purple Heart because he had some hard questions thrown to him by some belligerent congressman, what an insult to American soldiers, sailors, and service people.
Yeah, highly, highly inappropriate. This is a tweet that Rudy Giuliani put out with regard to these indictments that Rod Rosenstein announced. He says, of the Russian intelligence operatives, he says, the indictments Rod Rosenstein announced are good news for all Americans. The Russians are nailed. No Americans are involved. Time for Mueller to end this pursuit of the president and say President Trump is completely innocent. Your thoughts?
Well, this indictment proves that we never needed a special counsel. This indictment could have been brought by ordinary prosecutors, ordinary FBI agents. There's no conflict here. It's Russians they're going after. There's no president. There's no people around the president. There's no conflict between the attorney general, the deputy attorney general, and Americans. It's all Russians. Why do we need to spend $20, $30, $40 million, have special counsel appointed to do a routine national security investigation? Number one. Number two, we'll never find out the extent of the guilt of these people because, of course, they're never going to go on trial. They're indicted, but they'll never go on